Hello everyone. Today I am going to take you through the process of redesigning one of my original characters. So, a bit of backstory before we get started. Like a year ago, I decided to finally take this little project I had had in my brain and make it something more serious. So I decided to start out by making a concept for one of the main characters. And I did that, and I documented the whole process in a tutorial for Patreon. Point is, I designed this whole character, and I was happy with it, and I still am happy with it today, but my interest in the project and the time I had for the project kind of like dwindled very quickly, and then suddenly I had just forgotten all about it, and now here we are 1 year later, and I'm finally working on it again, and I'm excited about it again. I feel like this time around I have a lot more confidence and a lot more ideas. I'm way better at character design, which kind of created the problem of I still love this old design, but at this point my style has evolved so much that I kind of feel like she needs a facelift. So that's why I have decided to redesign her and kind of just like try to push stuff a bit further. I will be keeping a lot of the original elements, like the color scheme and just like the overall rhythm of the design. I think that still works really well from the old one, but I will be changing a few things to just make it more sleek and just more fitting of my current taste. So usually I like to bring a design through multiple iterations and multiple directions as well, but since this is mostly a soft rework, I'm letting myself skip all of that. This project for me is about being able to do something fun and creative that isn't work, so forcing myself to take this through kind of like the rigorous iterations I would do in a professional setting is kind of missing the point. So I'm just trying to take a more relaxed approach, especially this time around. But if you're interested in seeing more of the full process from idea to final concept, the tutorial I made a year ago is available on Gumroad for purchase. It is a bit outdated at this point, but I still think it's a good introduction if you've never done character design before, and you'll get to see all the iterations it took to arrive at this character. So even though I didn't do all of that again, I did do some just quick drawings in a notebook to establish the big shapes for the new outfit. And you can see one of the sketches I did up in the corner. This is the last one I did, and I'll just be using this concept thumbnail as a guide for myself as I keep working on this sort of illustration / call out of the character. So the large parts of her design are already figured out, but I'll be using this call out to kind of keep exploring the details and the materials and all of that stuff that's harder to do in just a quick concept sketch. So the reason I map out the big shapes before I even start working on a more detailed sketch of the character is because they are just the most important. When it comes to most things, we kind of register big shapes before we take the time to notice the details. So we will notice the size of a pair of huge shoulder pads before we notice that there's like a tiny little etching on them. We will notice a huge hat that someone is wearing before we see that they're also wearing glasses. And in some cases, the small details, which we can call the micro detail, isn't even visible unless you kind of search hard for it. And for this reason, it's super important to start your design process by thinking about the biggest shapes and how they affect the silhouette of your character. My favorite part of design personally is, and probably always will be, the small details, like figuring out all the little swirls on the armor and all the textures and patterns. But I still force myself to figure out everything else before I dive into it. It's literally the last step. I feel like the mark of a good character design is really, or not the only mark, but one of the marks of it is if you can take away all of the micro detail and all the like nice tiny shapes that are within the design, and you're just left with the silhouette and the big block of shapes, it should still work and it should still look nice and communicate whatever you want to communicate. So it's just really important to nail that down before anything else. The details should support and enhance your big and medium shapes and not the other way around. And one way I like to kind of quality check my designs for this is I like to either just black out the entire character so I only see the silhouette. This can be done by just creating a black fill layer and merging that down to your group. And then once I only see the silhouette, I ask myself a few questions. I ask myself, is this an interesting outline? Like, is there some cool stuff happening here, or does this just look like a person who is wearing like a t-shirt and jeans? Or does it look like something more? Does the shape language align with the theme and personality of the characters? So what this means is you really got to think about what each shape communicates, which might sound weird if you're new to character design, but like a spiky shape is usually more threatening or kind of off-putting, whereas a round shape is more inviting. So if you're designing a very nice positive character who's like a healer, for example, you probably want to go in with a lot of rounded shapes and a lot of curves to really communicate that that's the personality of this person. And vice versa, if you are designing someone who's threatening, you may want to do like some exaggerated spiky bits or whatever. Like at that point it comes very much about tropes and archetypes, but I think it's still super important to keep those tropes in your mind when you're designing. And then the last thing I try to ask myself is, have I seen this before, or is it fresh and recognizable? Which is pretty self-explanatory. Is this silhouette just like a dude in armor, or is it something more than that? And then the second way I like to kind of make sure that my overall shapes are working and interesting and different is I like to draw like these small little line drawings. So they can be super tiny, and you basically want to just simplify your concept as much as you possibly can. And then see if that's still an interesting design. And this is helpful for individual characters, but it's especially helpful if you're designing a group of characters. I see a lot of character designers who are just kind of starting out, and they'll do like a lineup of characters, or they'll do multiple characters. And if you would have taken all of those characters and drawn little simplified drawings of them, they would all look exactly the same because the artist has kind of utilized the same silhouette for all of them. But if you force yourself to check it this way, during the concept phase, you can very easily see if you're starting to repeat things or if you're still keeping things fresh with each character. So that's what I like to do to kind of check myself. I'm still like not the best at pushing shapes and creating interesting silhouettes in the first place, so just using these small tricks to kind of force myself to see it in a simplified way and to force myself to not be like, you know, sometimes you can start doing a concept and you get kind of seduced by the nice details you put into it. Like you start polishing it and it's like, ooh, this is looking nice, and it turns into a nice drawing, which can kind of trip you up because it might be a nice drawing, but it might still be kind of weak as a concept. So just making sure you always take a step back and turn all that noise off, turn the details off, the rendering, and see, does it still work if I simplify it as much as I possibly can? And if it does, then it's probably a good design. So after the big shapes are kind of worked out, as you can probably see, I've spent a lot of time kind of blocking in colors and like moving things around a little bit here and there to make sure all of my bigger shapes are working together. After all of that is kind of established and set in stone, I now move on to making sure that the flow is right. So what that basically means is that all the lines in your design should kind of draw the eye around the character. And you might have a specific place where you want to direct the people. Maybe you have something important on the chest and you want to kind of like utilize that as a center point and then kind of lead the eye out and into the chest area. Or maybe you just want to aim everything at the head area, which is a common thing to do. Either way, you want to make sure you don't have any of like these awkward lines that don't really go anywhere or that don't complement the overall shapes. You want to make sure everything is just nicely flowing into each other. Even with characters that are made up of super geometrical shapes and characters who are supposed to have a lot of like more stubby shapes, there should still be this nice sense of rhythm and flow to the shapes and to the lines of the design. It's kind of hard to explain just like quickly, but hopefully you can see how I kind of like move things around ever so slightly just to make sure that all the shapes are in the right place and all of the lines are harmonizing, I guess. So after the flow is established, you can start working on the color and the value. I would actually say that the value should be something that you're thinking about from the initial sketching phase. I always, personally, what I always do is I'll do kind of like a quick sketch with lines of my pose and just the bare bones of the outfit. And then I'll just go and block everything in with a dark gray. And I'll start to kind of like figure out a very basic value structure for what their outfit looks like before I start sketching more. This just makes it much easier again to see the big shapes, and you can also start thinking about the flow of kind of the values, if that makes sense. Again, just like the way you redirect the lines to a certain point, you want to have a nice kind of flow within the values. There are many kind of like tried and tested ways to do this. For example, keeping the legs dark and then the torso a bit lighter with some areas of heavy contrast. And then you have like something going on the head, which creates more contrast. But essentially, just like you would control the values in an illustration, you want to control the values. So you're making people look where you want them to look. You're making the less important parts less interesting to look at, and you're just kind of creating this nice cohesive design. So while values is something that you kind of start working on from the beginning, colors is something that I find it's good to keep them in mind from the very beginning, but only after you've decided fully on one concept. That's when I like to start iterating on the color schemes. And so for this character, I didn't have to do that this time because I already decided on the color scheme last time around. So this was a pretty easy process this time, and that's why I just kind of started sketching in color right away. So once the color has all been laid down, and once I've decided on everything, I can finally start working on the micro detail, which is so much fun, and it's kind of like the icing on top of the cake. I feel like some people say that, or I've heard certain people say that micro detail is just like the squiggly shit that no one notices. Hard disagree on that. I think smart micro detail can really elevate your design, but it doesn't work unless the base is good. So that's why we've been spending so much time on the big shapes and the flow and the colors and the values. That's kind of like all been laid as the groundwork for the design, and the design looks fine as is, but we're gonna put a lot of micro detail on there to kind of tell us a bit more about the culture this person is from. I have consciously decided to use micro detail that is similar to a lot of the shape language that the Vikings used. As you can see, I've had some references up on the screen, like kind of sporadically. They're from the Viking ship museum in Oslo. I really just love the way they did wood carvings, and I love the way they use so many weaving patterns in their architecture and on their tools. So that's something I've decided to pay a lot of homage to in this project of mine, and I really recommend that you guys go and look at historical references instead of just looking at what other concept artists are doing, because there's just so much interesting stuff out there and so many ways to utilize shapes that it's an amazing source of inspiration. I'm still making sure that this all plays into the flow of the overall design. You don't want to just kind of go ham on this. You want to use it sparingly because you still want to maintain some areas that are just kind of plain. These are called areas of rest. And it's basically just like, you don't want to just overwhelm your viewer with just patterns everywhere, textures everywhere, just so much stuff going on that it's kind of like just overwhelming. So I'm just placing it in a few key areas, and especially like around the seams of her garments. It's a nice place to just put like a little border. It's a natural place for it, and it doesn't disrupt the flow at all. And once all of the micro detail has kind of been put in there, it's time to kind of just go over everything and give it a final polish. I'm treating this as a call out of the character, but I'm also treating it as an illustration. Like, I want it to look very nice and rendered, so I'm spending a bit extra time on it. And then, as you can see, I've done a back view, and I've done kind of like a call out of her profile, but I'm keeping those very rough because it's kind of unnecessary to fully render the back view. We already are able to see all the materials in the front view, so kind of duplicating that for the back view would just be a waste of time. The most important bit is just that we know how the clothing wraps around her and what she looks like from the back. And at this point, the front view is fully rendered. We can see what every material is, and it's high resolution enough that we can see all the patterns, and there's no guesswork involved. Which means that this redesign is done. So in editing this video, I realized I didn't really give you much context to who this person is and what the project is. So not sharing too much right now. It's still in the early stages, but some quick key points is that this character, her name is Axel. She's a very cool monster hunter lady, and she is a part of just this personal project that I'm doing as a way to design characters and do cool illustrations. The project is currently just codenamed Project A because I suck at coming up with names, but it's something I'm very excited about and something that will hopefully grow into something more pretty soon, now that I finally have a redesign of the first character. So if you're interested in kind of the original process for this, how I arrived at the old design, like I mentioned, that tutorial is up on Gumroad. I believe it's a few hours long, maybe. It goes way more in depth than this video, and it covers kind of the whole process of mood board to final call out. And if you're interested in seeing this whole process in real time, I think it was about 6 or 7 hours. That will be one of the rewards on my Patreon this month, so that means August. And yeah, that's everything. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something. So that's all. Bye.